justice, the people's champion, justice, justice for all, justice.
Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Let's Start Justice with Jamaicans for Justice. I am Michael Jackson, the Executive Director for JFJ. Now we are in the Christmas season and I think we're feeling very happy. Most of those football fans, I think, had a wonderful Sunday. I actually witnessed an accident. No, you didn't have a good Sunday? Oh, France lost. Oh, sorry? But Brazil drop out long time, so Brazil come to this argument here. No, but Brazil drop out, so we not talk about no Brazil and no Germany and so on. But I am sure it really brought families together and communities. But for today, as we talk about the Christmas season, we're going to be focusing how communities and families can really play a greater role in mitigating and preventing any possible child abuse while the children are at home. But before we get into the topic, I want us to touch on the human rights issues of the previous week. Now, from before, we are aware that we have quite a number of climate justice and environmental rights issues in the country. I think when we look at Minister Matthew Samuda's performance so far, we are seeing some movements and some improvements, but certainly there are a number of areas that we do remain concerned about. So if we bring our attention to what is happening within the bauxite mining communities, particularly St. Anne and other parishes, we have seen, for example, where residents have voiced their concerns about the bauxite mining and the effects that it has had on their health. JFJ conducted a study earlier this year. We haven't officially released it, but certainly the findings are cause for concern. As I stated, the dust nuisance, it affected persons. You're talking about challenges with neighboring schools, children indicating that they can't breathe properly. So a number of medical issues. We have seen wherein persons have seen loss of livelihoods because of the bauxite mining, because you're converting, of course, possible agrolands and so on. Now, outside of the medical and issues and the loss of livelihoods, what we have also seen is that when residents say that I am not for the bauxite mining, they have made allegations that they are being threatened by state agents as well as some of those who are representing the private companies that are doing the bauxite mining. Following all of these threats that I mentioned, we have an organization called Freedom Imaginaries. And they indicated in June of 2022 that they're going to be filing some precautionary measures with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. For those who are not aware, Jamaica is a member state with the Organization of America's States, OAS. Now, following Freedom Imaginaries filing these precautionary measures, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, the IACHR, in September of this year, they indicated to the government of Jamaica that they are granting these precautionary measures. The government apparently did not respond then. And in November 24th, the IACHR again issued that they had granted these precautionary measures in favor of the persons from what they call the peasant communities of St. Anne, after considering that they are in serious and urgent situation that poses a risk of irreparable harm to their rights in Jamaica. And again, remember that we're speaking about the bauxite mining communities in the St. Anne environs. So basically, the IACHR is saying to the government of Jamaica that you have 20 days within which to respond to the precautionary measures, which is really highlighting to the government that you should take the necessary measures to protect the rights to life, personal integrity and health of the persons identified as beneficiaries in St. Anne, adopt the necessary measures to prevent threats, harassment, and other acts of violence against the beneficiaries, consult and agree upon the measures to be adopted with the beneficiaries and their representatives, and report on the actions taken to investigate the events that led to the adoption of these precautionary measures so as to prevent events such as these from recurring. Now, the government has not yet responded and the 20 days have since elapsed. Now, there are conversations or questions around whether or not the precautionary measures are in fact legally binding. But whatever the position that one takes, the reality is that as a member state within the OAS, certainly from a principled position, one would hope that the government would respond. Now, I think the CEO, Theresa Moody, had indicated on another radar program that one could not expect the government of Jamaica to reasonably action all of what the precautionary measures is asking it to do. But it is disappointing that not even a response has been forthcoming from the government of Jamaica to say that I acknowledge the correspondence from the IACHR and that I intend to respond to whatever precautionary measures have been raised. So we're urging the government through Matthew Samuda, who is the minister responsible, to see it important to respond as soon as possible. We're also aware, just moving from the IACHR precautionary measures issue, the state of public emergency ended. When was it? The government imposed it December 6th, reimposed it. So it would have ended December 19th, thereabout, that 14-day period, which was what? Yesterday. Now, you have a state of public emergency imposed in some 8 parishes. So you're talking about quite a number of Jamaican citizens being affected by the state of emergency. The SOEs, as you're aware, it curtails several of your rights, your fundamental rights, freedom of movement. You're talking about the possibility of being arrested and detained without any evidence. And since that reimposition of the SOE, to date, we do not know what the regulations governing the SOE entails. JFJ, we went on the Twitter page of the Prime Minister, the Minister of National Security, and the Minister of Information. I know that human rights advocate Susan Goff also made a tweet to the Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs, who had responded to indicate that, guess what? It should be on the OPM page. It should be on other websites of the government. To date, however, the SOEs, it would have ended. And as a resident within these parishes, I do not know what the regulations are that were governing the SOE. I don't know what powers the police had that was governing the SOE. And we're saying to the government of Jamaica that that is not good. That is not a good position to take. You can't be imposing mechanisms that curtails our fundamental rights that are guaranteed to us in this constitution, and one does not see it fit to ensure that the citizens are aware of whether those rights, which of those rights, have been curtailed. The government of Jamaica were saying that you ought to do better. That is not good. Now, let me move off that. I think the Minister of National Security, I'm not remembering which Caribbean island he is in now, discussing crime and security issues. Let me say this quickly. We are aware of the Caribbean regionalist or regionalism approach to CARICOM, the Caribbean Single Market and Economy, the CSME. And one of the underpinning principles of the CSME, for example, is security. So we know that we have freedom of travel. We have a common passport. If you look at your passport, you see CARICOM stamped on the front. What I would hope, though, is that the Minister of National Security and other similar responsible posts across the Caribbean would really put heads together to see how we can deal with matters of transnational crime. You're talking about border control concerns. You're talking about the issues of drug trafficking, issues of extradition, perhaps how you can improve your witness protection program if you really have an agreement that really looks at how we can support each other across the island. So I'm hoping that the conversation would move beyond the one island hopping to more systemic and systematic approaches to how we deal with crime in the Caribbean islands. So that is something I'm urging the Ministers of National Security to get on. To move to the right of the day, you're aware that Jade is not with me. She would be here right now giving me the little eye to say, Mikel, you need to move on quickly. But the right of the day, in keeping with our topic, is focusing on the Convention of the Rights of the Child. Now, Jamaica would have signed on to the CRC, the Convention of the Rights of the Child, in 1990, and it was ratified 1 year after in 1991. I'm not sure if our viewers are seeing the right of the day on the screen. But the right of the day, which really speaks to Article 4, is urging the states and really highlighting the obligation of states that they shall undertake all appropriate legislative, administrative, and other measures for the implementation of the rights recognized in the present convention. And this is in regards to the economic, social, and cultural rights that our children have, and the obligations that states, such as Jamaica, shall undertake such measures to the maximum extent of their available resources and where needed within the framework of international cooperation. So the Convention of the Rights of the Child is also supported by our domestic law, which is the Child Care and Protection Act. And our conversation today would certainly touch on that as well. Now to the trivia of this week. And if you win this trivia, you're going to be getting what, Karen? $1,000 credit? So you couldn't give the people them $2,000 like it's Christmas period? Not for the easy question, but it's Christmas time now. I'm begging you. I think we need to give a little gift to our viewers as well. So the trivia question of this week: which two agencies were merged to form the Child Protection and Family Services Agency, which is the CPFSA? Which two agencies were merged to form the CPFSA? All right. So our topic for today, as I stated earlier, we are in the Christmas period. Our children are at home, and we want to really discuss what the warning signs are that parents and communities and caregivers should really be looking out for to ensure that we, one, recognize the symptoms of child abuse and we are able to really address it. And secondly, we put measures in place within our home setting to prevent child abuse from actually taking place. Now, we're going to be joined by Mrs. Lisa Bagwadat Vassal, who is the Deputy Registrar at the CPFSA. And I want to start out by indicating that in May of this year, which was recognized as Child's Month, there was a national policy dialogue on the ending violence against children, where the Minister of Education and Youth, Favour Williams, stated that the CPFSA received more than 12,000 reports of child abuse each year. Corporal punishment, which is really where we hit children, it's a cultural phenomenon in Jamaica and perhaps across the Caribbean, was highlighted as the most prominent form of abuse being perpetuated, with a greater concentration of the practice in the Kingston and St. Andrew area compared to the rural areas in Jamaica. Now, when we also looked at a 2020 report by the Pediatric Association of Jamaica, it showed a 70% increase in cases of child sex abuse in Jamaica during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're aware that during COVID-19, our children were at home doing classes, and all instances of child abuse actually increased during that period. The report concluded that the cases involved mostly girls aged 3 to 12 years who were being molested by adult men in their 40s and 50s. Given that the safety net of schools has since been closed, what steps can be taken to keep our children safe from predators during this festive season? As I stated earlier, we're going to be joined by Mrs. Lisa Vassal of the Child Protection and Family Services Agency, but we're going to take a break, and on the other side of the break, we will go into the discussion. Keep with us. Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. Before we get into the discussion, just reminding viewers that they can call the studio line at about 1:35, 1:40 at 676-4996. That's 676-4996. You can also WhatsApp us your comments at 239-7583. And we are on social media, so you can find Jamaicans for Justice at Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We also have our public view that you can make your comments. And I think the question for this week is, what can parents and caregivers do to mitigate children from possible child abuse within the homes and communities? With us to discuss the topic today, as I indicated, Mrs. Lisa Vassell, who is the Deputy Registrar at the Child Protection and Family Services Agency. Do we have Mrs. Vassell on the line? Good afternoon, Mrs. Vassell. Oh, you're on Zoom. Okay. It's happy to see your face.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for joining JFJ to discuss this important topic. So,
Sure.
can we just start by you just painting a picture for the listeners in terms of the numbers of child abuse complaints that you get? What are the numbers looking like?
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for having me here with you this afternoon. Well, the numbers, what are they looking like? So let me start back and go back to 2020.
Yes.
And we know that that is the COVID period. So we are seeing where, and bear in mind that the reports that we receive here at the National Children's Registry, which is a unit in the Child Protection and Family Services Agency, that the reports that we receive, you know, that there are allegations until proven otherwise. But we
Yes.
still take the concerns of the Jamaican citizens. So in 2020, we would have received 9,883 child abuse reports. And in 2021, we realized, with the opening back of the country, that we would have seen just a little under, well, over 11,000 reports. So it's 11,007. But 2022, yes, a little shocking, but at the same time, we would have expected this because we noted that, it was full opening up of the country, and persons are now seeing what is happening with our children and call to make their concerns, recalls or walk-ins or emails or WhatsApp, whatever it is, to or the National Children's Registry. So as at November 2022, we would have received 14,183 child abuse reports, suspected child abuse reports at the National Children's Registry. And for us, yes, concerning, but at the same time, we have recognized that, yes, the population can identify what child abuse looks like and the concern that they would have for the nation's children.
All right. So let us dig in the numbers a little bit so we can understand what the numbers are saying. I'm coming from an environment that really was within the HIV sector. And one of the things that we recognized then was that during the COVID-19 period, because the children were locked in with their abusers, you find that the low reporting numbers wasn't really because the abuse wasn't taking place, but the children didn't get an opportunity to report the abuse, for example, to the guidance counselor, to the teacher within the school environment. So anecdotally, we had recognized within the HIV sector that the numbers were far greater than what perhaps 2020 was telling you. Do you have that same consensus, or do you have a different perspective that perhaps the abuse is increasing rather than the report itself is increasing?
All right, so let me go back to before COVID and give you another picture that in 2019 we would have seen 12,889 reports. So that gave you the picture that once the children were out there in the public's eye with the prescribed persons who were aware of what child abuse looks like, that they were actually reporting the cases of child abuse. So the possibility exists that it's not that it has been increasing, but it's because the children are now out, and so the reports are now back to what it was
before
COVID, although we have seen a little increase over 2019, and 75% of these reports that we see, the 14,183, they're actually new cases, meaning it's the first time these children are interacting. These reports, the names are coming to the agency as, first-time reporters. So that for us, we are saying that, yes, something is happening.
It is happening. Can you just remind me of the 2019 numbers?
The 2019, it was 12,889.
Okay, and I want to go back to an important point that you made just now with a follow-up question. You're saying that the 14,183 since, as at November of this year, those are unique cases in terms of the first time you're seeing the
No, so
names
about
of these
75% of them
are
are
new.
are new.
And just to clarify again, all of these are unique reports in terms of a unique child. So there are no duplication of the reports coming in. Let me clarify what I'm asking.
Mhm,
A teacher perhaps can report that child A is, on the receiving end of abuse. Then the
mhm,
neighbor would report that the same child A is on
mhm,
the receiving end of abuse. Is that
mhm.
the situation in some of these cases? Are the, all
It is.
it is?
It is. So the next 25%
Yes.
would be children who are reporting, or somebody's reporting them over and over and over again.
So, how many of these cases have your agency been able to substantiate whether or not an abuse is actually taking place?
Well, that number we have not yet put together to say, the amount that they actually say well, they are true cases, true, when I say true in the sense of, yes, substantiated to say that, these are actually abuse situations that the
Yes.
children have been facing. So
Okay.
that number I don't have at this moment.
Still digging through it, but in terms,
Hmm.
one of the challenges, CPFSA doing such good work as a state agency, but I know the realities of our resources perhaps would constrain you in investigation officers or investigative
Hmm.
officers, social workers, and so on. So my question to you, Mrs. Vassell, what is the caseload looking like in terms of the number of cases to a social worker for follow up on these matters to substantiate whether or not an abuse is actually taking place?
Well, I am unable to say what the caseload looks like, but I know that the caseload is higher than it should be for a social worker.
Like 30 to 1 was the ratio, I believe, before. I don't remember off the top of my head, but you're saying it's much higher.
Hmm.
All right. So can you indicate to us what the types of abuse is looking like? Corporal punishment versus sexual abuse. What is the breakdown in the numbers?
All right. So what it is looking like. So bearing in mind that when we are doing the breakdown at the National Children's Registry, is that one child can be subjected to multiple
Yes.
incidents. So when we do the calculation, the incident will seems much higher than the amount of reports that were received. Because, for example, let me use, a child is being beaten and at the same time being sexually abused. So you know that that is two different incidents for one particular child. So that's how we calculate the incident type. And the different types of abuse that we're seeing at the registry being the highest is neglect. And this is any serious disregard for a child's supervision, care or discipline. So this is the highest one that we are seeing. So from January to November 2022, we are seeing 6,260 incidents of neglect meted out to our children,
So that's almost half.
if that's how you want to look at it.
So how many for sexual abuse in
So
terms
for
of
sexual
percentage?
abuse, we are seeing 3,222.
And in terms of corporal punishment, what is that looking like?
So physical abuse is looking much higher than sexual abuse, 3,713. Also, for these incident types, we have seen increases over the previous years.
As
So
well.
from 2020, 2021, we have seen, increases. For emotional abuse, 1,433, and we know that this is hard to prove, and some persons might not readily pick it up.
Talking about how we
1,430.
talk to our children, the
Mm-hmm.
shouting and the
The
boy
attitude that we
and
give to
that kind of
them.
attitudinal approach. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Mrs.
Yes.
Vassell, we're going to take a break and then we pick up. Please, if you just bear with us a little.
All right, sure, no problem.
All right, welcome back to Let's Start Justice. We're discussing the topic of what can communities and parents do to really mitigate and respond to child abuse that is taking place within the homes and within the communities. If you have a comment, I'm urging you to call the call-in line at 676-4996. That's 676-4996. Or you can WhatsApp your views at 239-7583, 239-7583, and you can also contact us via our social media platforms. We're joined by Mrs. Lisa Vassal of the Child Protection and Family Services Agency, CPFSA, and she was giving us some breakdown of the statistics, which indicated that as at November 2022, the numbers are alarmingly high, where 14,183 reports have been made of child abuse, and some 75% of that number is really new cases coming in terms of new reports, new children that persons are saying are being abused within the homes and within the communities. Welcome back with us, Mrs. Vassal. Thanks for staying.
Thank you.
One of the things I want to pick up with you on is the types of abuses, and if you could explain some of them to us. So I'm just going to go through each with you, and you just explain what it really is, because what I really want is for the listeners and communities to know what child abuse is, to look at the signs of child abuse, and I'm urging people where they can help families to do so, and where they see these abuses taking place to certainly make reports. So from your statistics, it really suggests that almost half of the reports that came in indicated that our children are suffering from neglect. Can you just explain to us what does neglect mean?
All right, so neglect, and this is, as I said, this is the highest type of reports that we see at the register that we receive in different forms. So neglect is any serious disregard for a child's supervision. What does that look like? Children are left at home alone. And let me just put it here that sometimes we forget who a child is.
Yes.
Because we see the older ones and we say, oh no, man, I'm a teenager. So it's anyone who is under the age of 18 years old. So supervision, meaning that a 17-year-old should not be left at home to be caring for a 2-year-old, a 1-year-old, as well as improper supervision, meaning that you know that the person is not capable of supervising your child. So the supervision is inadequate. For example, you know that you have a bedridden relative who is there and you left the child in care of. So if just in case that something is happening, that relative or friend might not be able to give the proper supervision that particular child would be in need of. So we have to pay attention to that when we are saying supervision. So that's one of the biggest one. Medical needs.
Pause it though, Mrs. Vassal, because one of the pushback we've gotten is that we're living in this utopia world. We want our children to be protected, but are we ignoring the socio-economic realities of families? For example, you mentioned the 17-year-old watching the 2-year-old child. But when you have people have to go out to work and so on, are we ignoring the social class issues, and are we putting forward an ideal situation that really would not hold for majority of the working poor in Jamaica? How would you respond to that, that we can still consider the rights of the child and their safety?
All right. So, and yes, quite a few times we get that. So, miss, what do you expect me to do? Tie the child to me and bring them go wherever that I'm going? But I always say to the parents, it's better to be safe than to be sorry. And yes, we understand at the CPFSA that parents, that they do need to go out and make a living, and they do need to go out and work. However, we need to find and put measures in place to keep our children safe. And we need to have the conversation as well with our children on how to be safe. So probably we need to get back into the village, raising the child, meaning identifying some safe persons in our community, in our little village that we live, safe spaces. So I know from time to time, like now in this time, that churches and other community centers might be having some programs that they can leave their children with at, for a particular time. Throughout the summer, when they're having like summer schools, instead of leaving the children at home, or summer programs that they can leave the children with these particular persons, and for the most part, there are no charges. So I'm not talking about like daycare. So there are no charges. But we need to go back to the place where we can identify safe people in our community who we can leave our children in the care. Because I'm also aware that while some persons might move out of their communities to other community and they might not have families there, they need to build that relationship
Yes,
so that they
yes.
can leave their children in the care of, because we have heard it too many times where parents and guardians would have left their children in the care of themselves, basically, and we hear the bad and the sad news,
Yes.
and that's what we are trying to avoid.
And I grew up in a time in St. Anne wherein we were always by our neighbors' houses, actually. Always.
Mm-hmm.
We got fed there. The only thing we didn't do was to bathe there. But
Mm-hmm.
everything was done next door.
Mm-hmm.
But it brings us to another reality, though, of the sexual abuse
Mm-hmm.
situation, wherein when you look at the statistics, most of the allegations or the incidents of sexual abuse is committed by the very family members and the community, the next door neighbor that you perhaps would leave your child with. How
Mm-hmm.
do we mitigate and
So
respond to
hey,
situations such as those?
so thanks for that. So sexual abuse is any sexual activity expressed towards a child, whether it is your action
Yes.
or what you say to the child, because sometimes people believe, it's only the action, it's only, having sexual intercourse with the child that is actually sexual abuse. So it can be the things that we say to them, or even the way that we look at them, the text messages that we send to them. So these are
And the
any sexual
recording of the
behaviors.
children doing, forgive the language, the daggering videos that you see on social
Yes.
media emerging sometimes,
Yes,
yes.
yes, these are offenses under the Sexual Offences Act. So we have to be careful that any sexual behaviors expressed towards our children can be seen as sexual abuse.
Okay.
So yes, back to your question, is that yes, again, at the National Children's Registry where I sit, it's alarming that, the persons who should be protecting our children are the ones who are hurting and harming them. Hence, that's why I go back to say that as parents and guardians, that we need to see as best as possible how to identify these safe people. And it's not going to happen in one shot. It's
Yes.
going to be an overtime thing that we look on the people in our space as our support system of these people that we can leave our children in the care of.
Yes, absolutely. And we are in the Yuletide season.
Mm-hmm.
You have a number of families who are trying to earn. And this
Mm-hmm.
brings us to another form of child abuse that we see
Mm-hmm.
happening a lot in Jamaica, which is child labor.
Mm-hmm.
I asked my son to cut up 2 onions the other day and a sweet pepper, and the child charged me $2,000. So, because according to him, servitude ended, I told him that I'm going to charge him $800 for the breakfast after that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, but the reality is that for a number of families, you see the children out selling things. What does the law
Mm-hmm.
say around that, in terms of the age group that can be allowed to be involved in some labor forms?
All right.
What are we seeing with the numbers around that, and what is allowed under the Child Care and Protection Act?
All right. So what the numbers look like as at November, we had seen 438 incidents of child labor
Yes.
allegations again. But what the law says that children are not allowed to work under the age of 13. So it's any work that is morally harmful and dangerous, socially
But not the cutting up
dangerous
of
to
the sweet peppers and so on. That's fine.
the children. But him can argue and probably say that him can cut off him finger. The knife can be hazardous to him. So it depends on the age. It
Yes.
depends on the age. So yes, all of this that we have to look on in its totality. Is the environment hazardous to the child? So like now in the Chinese and then lifting up a 100 bag of flour and a 100 bag of rice, even though they're 13, these are still some things that we have to consider.
Yes.
So not under 13, they're not allowed to work. 13 to 15, there are conditions under which the children are allowed to work. But then when we look at it, when we see them on the streets, working, or let me also say begging. So
Yes.
we do not consider that we are putting the children in harm's way, putting them in otherwise in need of care and protection when we
Yes.
bring them out onto the streets to be begging.
You're putting them in hazardous situations that can lead
Yes.
to other forms of
Yes,
abuse,
and
certainly.
and I can twin it to another form, which is called child trafficking. There are many persons who
Yes.
don't even pay attention to this. So, it's an activity where the child can either be recruited or received or harbored somewhere for the means of exploitation.
Yes, I see
So,
that a lot. Quite a number of reports come to JFJ where you
mhm,
have youngsters, and when they come reporting, it's as an adult. But when you really listen to these situations, you get a sense that, oh, when they were children, they were brought into sex work, for example, forced sex, or the family send you to Kingston to go help somebody who have a little money. But when you look at the situation, you're really suggesting that it is forced labor. So we've had our own complaints around situations like those. So I'm not sure what is the number looking like, and how do we get a little bit more aware on this particular issue of child trafficking?
So 29, just 29. However, I know that the task force on trafficking from time to time will do advertisements, read trafficking, and try to sensitize the public. But I can tell you that if you don't have an eye for it, you probably will not pick it up, because trafficking in general, to me, it seems like it has been so ingrained in our culture, and we have seen it as a norm, as you just clearly outlined a situation where parents or guardians will send their child or their children from country to town to assist a family member somewhere in town to do some work. And instead of sending the child to school, then the child is allowed to, they exploit the child, either for work or for sexual favors. And we probably did not see it as child trafficking.
Yes.
We
Mrs.
see it
Vassell,
as
can you
probably-
stay with me for another 5 or so minutes?
Sure.
We're going to take a break, and then when you come back, you just indicate to us again the warning signs and what we can do in terms of reporting.
All right, no problem.
Thank you so much. We take the
You're
break. Welcome back to Let's Start Justice. We're discussing what we can do during the Christmas season to ensure that we protect our children, mitigate possibilities of child abuse within the homes and within communities. We are joined by Mrs. Lisa Vassell of the Child Protection and Family Services Agency. So, Mrs. Vassell, just going to pick up on the last comment that you had made, and you were guiding us through the issue of child trafficking, for example. But I want to go back to one of the more common forms of child abuse that we see in Jamaica, which is corporal punishment, the emotional abuse that our children suffer through, that is almost a norm, the shouting. How we call our children, they don't do good in school, and you say, workless boy, workless, where we don't even say girl, we say girl. That is the kind of language that we spew at our children. What can we do differently as parents and as family members within the household?
All right, thanks. So we have to examine our own selves as parents and guardians as how is it, and we have to make a deliberate attempt, because I can tell you that, especially when parents and guardians, adults, get frustrated, the first thing that we can think about to come from our mouths are words that are hurting to whomever, and we wouldn't want people to say these things. And this is emotional abuse now. These things are express these attitudes and behaviors towards us. So we have to make a deliberate attempt in how is it that we treat our children. They are little people just like you and I. So we are expecting them to excel, but yet say we tell them that they are good for nothing. We tell them that they are careless. We tell them that, you know, they're going to turn out to they're not going to turn out to be anything good. So again, we have to be mindful of the words that we say. We have to be mindful of the time that we administer discipline to our children, and that goes back to the physical abuse. So it's not only the beating, but we see where persons take other forms of punishment, physical punishment towards our children, such as the burning. You know, so a child will probably take a $100 from you, and the only thing that you can think about is to boil up hot water and put the child's hand in. These are some of the things that we are seeing when it comes down to physical abuse. The broken bones, these are some of the signs, and these build up aggression in our children, and it can lead, it's something that will live with them most times for the rest of their lives.
The cycle of abuse continues, certainly.
Yes. They will remember these things that we say to them. They will remember these harsh forms of punishment that are meted out to them as time progresses. So we have to be mindful of the ways that we treat our children. And while we go through on a daily basis, it starts from they are small, having conversations with our children about how is it that you are expecting them to behave, and what are the consequences of, not following the rules, not abiding by the things that you say to them. And they are never too small to start this conversation. So most times what I've recognized is that parents, us as parents, we want to have this conversation when they are teenagers.
Yes.
So we tell them, don't do this, or this is not appropriate. But when they are smaller, we do not have. So have the conversation when they are small, and be
Yes.
mindful, parents and guardians, of the type of punishment that we administer
So we need to look
our
at
children.
alternative forms of punishment
Yes.
beyond.
Be
Yes.
mindful. So now we know that they love the gadgets. So we know that, this is something that they live on. And that's another story about the gadgets and safety on the internet. So this is something that we can do. Take away their gadgets for a little time. If we know that they love to go to a particular place, restrict that instead of administering the physical punishment
Yes.
to them. And most times as parents, when we do it, we regret. Most parents regret doing it to the children.
Thank you. And what are some of the warning signs we should look out for? So for example, I am next door. I'm within the household. It's an extended family. I have visitors coming in. The uncle from down by Westmoreland that I haven't seen in a while. And I start seeing my child becoming a little bit uncomfortable. What do I look out for as a parent?
So you mentioned it, uncomfortable. So once you recognize that the child, so for example, the child was friendly with Uncle Tom, for example, and then all of a sudden the child starts to resent Uncle Tom. This is a warning sign that, something is up, because naturally and normally, especially the smaller ones,
Yes.
they are friendly little creatures. And once you see something is up, the aggression now starts to be expressed towards Uncle Tom or towards somebody. Warning sign.
Yes.
The child start to tell you, for example, he used to send the child next door and say, Mommy, Daddy, Grandma, whomever, Auntie, I don't want to go back next door. Warning sign. The child had stopped wetting bed and all of a sudden regress. Warning sign. There's an indication. You're bathing. For the smaller ones now, you're bathing the child and you realize that something don't look right. Warning sign. As parents, for the younger ones, again, we need to examine them to see what is happening. Warning sign. The child start to express suicidal ideations and tendencies. Warning sign.
Yes.
The time spent on their gadgets, the internet, is something that we need to look into as well. What is it that they're actually doing? Who is it that they're actually talking to?
Yes.
Because most times we as parents, we don't look at this, the languages that they are using on the internet, and they are probably 2 or 3 steps ahead of us. We need to know what these languages are, these sites. So we are looking for them on Facebook. They're not there.
Yes.
No, the new sites now that our children are visiting, and have a conversation to them about it.
Great. And what numbers do I call if I suspect child abuse?
So if you're suspecting any form of child abuse whatsoever, you can feel free at any time, 24 hour, any day of the week, 211. Simple for a child, simple for an adult to remember, and it's free of cost from any network in Jamaica.
The 888 Protect is still working?
It works, but we know that, it's hard for persons to remember. So even if you call 88 Protect, yes, we will still pick up.
Yes.
But 211, simple, and it's free.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we will continue to champion the message from JFJ. And
Thank you very much.
A blessed Christmas.
You too.
Great.
And to your viewers.
Thank you. No, that was Mrs. Lisa Vassal of the Child Protection and Family Services Agency. And again, just reminding you that if you suspect anything around child abuse, you call 211, as she indicated. I have my 2 little tidbits as well I want to plug here. A number of us, we have our children calling everybody Tom, Dick, Harry, Jack and Jill, auntie and uncle. I would really urge us to desist from that, because those are special titles that should only be for those whom we trust. We can't have our children calling everybody auntie and uncle, because what it suggests is a level of safety that perhaps isn't deserved by that adult. Let them be respectful by saying Miss and Mr. Just want to tell persons around that. A little thing that I had my child doing when he was younger is this concept of safety circle. It was something that he learned at school, and I expounded or expanded on it. When you talk about safety circle, it's really the people within the safety net of the household that you can trust. Your child should know who should be able to bathe them. Not everybody should be seeing your child naked, for example. That is something I told my son was only reserved for mommy up to a particular age group. They should be sleeping in bed with. The good touch and the bad touch. We don't tell our children, you have them use the private parts by using the appropriate words, vagina and penis. So at least they know what good touch, bad touch means in the appropriate areas. So I want to urge people to really be thinking about these things and having the conversations with the children. And the 211 number is not only for adults. This is something you should teach your child. If it is that they do not feel safe, you should have that environment of trust where your child can come to you and speak freely. And there's a balance between respecting the privacy rights of your child, but also knowing how you keep an appropriate oversight. Monitor their internet usage. Who they're talking to on WhatsApp, what kind of conversation they're having with uncle and auntie. I want us to also recognize that our children, they're not just abused by men, but also adult women. And I want to challenge our men who perhaps they had their first sexual intercourse with an adult woman. That is also child abuse, men. So I want us to challenge these things when it comes to our own children as well. All right, so Karen, do we have a winner for the trivia? Who is that person? Tristan, you are the lucky winner of $2,000 credit. The communications officer was feeling a little bit cheap by just giving you $1,000, but I up it. So you can tell me thanks on IG, right? And the Child Protection and Family Services Agency, CPFSA, the two agencies that were merged was the Child Development Agency and the Office of the Children's Registry, and they were merged in 2017. And that merger again resulted in the Child Protection and Family Services Agency. You see, who are on behind the scenes saying that? No, I want to load them up. Listen to me, man. You see this nonsense about when you lose on the virginity and you feel good as a youngster and say it was a big woman was the first experience. No, it's not right. And when we have our boys, we should let them know that no big woman supposed to be touching them in certain ways. I have that conversation with my son, and him still like, oh no, but I talk to him properly around it, yes? So I monitor every single conversation between auntie and uncle just the same. We need to challenge these type of things. These things are what leading to our children not feeling safe. And let them watch the anime and these kind of, listen, we have to be careful as parents, vigilant in how we oversee. But anyway, I'm back home. On my holiday, JFJ offices are closed. But if there's an emergency, please feel free to email us at complaints@Jamaicans for Justice. Have a good week. Thank you so much for tuning in.